Here's an incredible O-gauge empire featuring numerous bridges, trestles, and tunnels. Many of the bridges are massive structures, and the timber trestles are both long and tall. Trains featuring colorful livery and unique equipment from the 1930s to the 1960s are operated through highly detailed scenes in front of dazzling photo backdrops. This impressive layout is located in a room addition occupying 1,000 square feet that was constructed just for the trains. Layout owner Alan Goldman is a man with no small plans. He studied the history of railroading and found it an important reason our country grew and prospered. His layout incorporates scenes depicting the association of railroads and industry, such as logging, coal mining, refining oil, and commercial businesses. He also has a circus, since the rails provided a way for these shows to travel the nation. He enjoys teaching and uses these scenes to introduce children to our nation's past. Alan takes us back to his childhood days to explain how he became interested in railroads.
When I was growing up in Maine, there were only a few kids privileged enough to get Lionel train sets for Christmas. And so the rest of us would all share in running Lionel trains on the equivalent of a ping pong sized table. The love of model railroading was certainly reinforced even back during World War II by riding real trains. The experience of riding a real passenger train reinforced the fun in going over to somebody else's house and helping them to run their railroad. And so the love of railroading was embedded at an early age.
Alan's love of model trains didn't end when he entered young adulthood.
While I was going to college at night in Baltimore, I would buy HO kits and would just make or assemble the rolling stock and the engines, but never had a layout until I was probably in my 30s, my early 30s. And then I had a layout until the kids got married and left the house, and then there was a layout of HO. When we sold the house, as so many people do when the kids leave home and you don't need that size home, the HO layout was disassembled and given away. 20 years later, in 1996, a friend of mine here in Alabama said, "Come on and let me show you something new in railroading." And I went over to his home and I saw the scale, the premier line of MTH trains with proto sounds, and I was simply blown away. The high rail scale O-gauge is just a pleasure to run, and yet they're easy to handle because they're larger, they're dependable, and the sound systems and the control systems available today just made me decide that I wanted to get back into model railroading. I had no idea. I was busy like most of us, working and spending leisure time traveling, and just didn't know that such a thing existed. And once I found out about it, my juices were flowing again, this time to do it right, to do it in a way that I never could have done it before.
With excitement flowing, Alan hired an architect to design a room addition onto his Alabama home for a layout.
The room was constructed in '96, and beginning in '97 was what can we do to build a railroad and have a lot of things happen at one time. And so I used a computer CAD program where I was able to overlay one level after another level of track to see. I liked large trains. I knew I needed 72 inch radiuses as minimums and larger. And using this computer, I was able to design it. And it took almost a year of fiddling with it, and came out with what appeared to be a very workable plan. And then I hired skilled people who were able to implement the carpentry, the bench work, the laying of the track, the wiring. And as we got further and further, I met people by going to York, being in TCA twice a year, who were specialists in building different types of items, such as this 7-foot refinery, oil refinery. Many things I brought back a year or two before we even were ready for them, but nonetheless. Read Old Gauge Railroading magazine. I got and looked at every single video, which I have right here, of old gauge railroading, and got to see other people's layouts, plus what I visited personally. And all of these ideas come together when you decide what you want to do, and you pick what applies and what makes sense to you. I wanted a railroad that shows the steam era and shows the diesel era. So I picked, rather than picking a specific railroad line, I picked a time era from the 1930s to the 1960s. So we have some steam trains here that are from the 30s, from the 40s, from the 50s, and of course diesels, which started out in the late 30s, and the 40s, and the 50s, and the early 60s. And so the rolling stock and the engines and the lines are not necessarily from one part of the country, but they're all over, and it's just a frame of time. And I picked the lines that had great livery, great design, they look great. The beauty of this hobby is you can do with it as you wish. If you want to take license, you don't have to be so serious, you know. You can just, it's whimsical. There's a lot of fun in this, and just expressing things that you like and doing, and there's no rules. The beauty of this is that it's waiting on you. It's not demanding anything. Depending on the time, depending on your frame of mind, you can come and do as much or as little as you want to do. And that's the most enjoyable thing about this. It's a source of pride, it's a source of enjoyment, but it's not a source of stress. It relieves the stress.
If there's one thing that stands out above all else on this beautiful railroad, it's the number of bridges, bridge types, and the expanse of trestle work. But these spans weren't built for looks alone. There's a reason there are so many bridges incorporated into the track design.
With a room that is just slightly under 1,000 square feet, the way you increase the size of the railroad is you go vertical. And we now have a total of 7 levels. I saw an ad in Old Gauge Railroading magazine for these Warren Truss bridges run by Miami Valley. And I contacted them and had them send one kit. And after that, it was just kit after kit after kit for not only the truss bridges, the sweeping 9-foot wide trestle, double track trestle. And I hired a carpenter who never built any bridges, had no concept of model railroading, but he loved making models. And I set him up a little shop in my home, and he faithfully made every one of these bridges. And the end result is just total happiness in how realistic they are, and they do without any question. They hold the weight of some very, very large locomotives.
The backdrops are indeed amazing and add a tremendous amount of realism to the scenes. But once again, there's a reason they were added beyond their obvious purpose.
This room was built specifically for the railroad, but also for resale. You have to think about resale at some point, not in my lifetime, but after my lifetime. The room is really a garden room. It's got a lot of windows. And what we did was we covered all of the windows with 1/8-inch masonite. And on the masonite, we were able to mount these murals. I got a good wallpaper man who was able to mount these murals from Backdrop Warehouse, Salt Lake City, in such a way that they're seamless, and they're digital photographs that are printed on 12-foot long by 3-foot high murals, and it pasted right onto the 1/8-inch masonite, and it's so effective. It ties in with what we wanted to do. There's a backdrop for the oil refinery. There's a backdrop city for behind the circus, where we have the mountains. I was able to come up with continuous back-to-back layout. It actually is a mirror image, but you don't realize that it repeats itself. But it went all the way around the room, and it just all worked out.
There are several key scenes depicting the history associated with American industry and its connection to the railroad.
I have in this layout a logging operation, which brings the logs down to a sawmill and converts it into lumber. I have a coal mining operation. I have an oil refinery operation. I have the commercial district. And I tried to incorporate some of the major industries that the railroads were able to help make this a great country. And without any question, without the railroads, we could not have developed the kind of industry in this country. So the layout is not only a source of enjoyment, but it's also, if you want to say, a microcosm of America and the history of America and how the railroads impacted it. The largest buildings in many towns back then were the railroad stations, and that was significant because the railroads were the most important industry, bringing and taking commerce to the different towns. This country runs on oil, and oil and oil refineries were necessary, and the railroad with the tank cars transported the oil. I was lucky enough in one of my trips to the York, Pennsylvania TCA convention to meet an individual by the name of Alan Graziano, who works for an oil refinery and whose hobby is making oil refineries. And I commissioned him to make me a oil refinery 7 feet long, 84 inches long. Consider that such an important part of the railroad, because we do have some trains that have a huge consist of tank cars. And I can bring them over to the siding here, and we can just fiddle over here, moving the tank cars back and forth with switches to the various sidings. And certainly we recognize even today how important the oil industry is. The electrical power in this country was generated by burning coal. And coal is a very, very important revenue producer for the railroads, and was a very important source of energy and heat for America. And so I felt that that was such an important basic industry of America. Even in making steel, you needed the coal. So how can you have a railroad without having a coal mine? And then you can transport the coal to other parts of the country. In the early days, with railroading, the circus train consisted of 100 cars, and when the circus came to town, it came to town because the railroads were able to bring it. And it enabled the circus to move beyond the East Coast with large city populations all over the country. I wanted to devote a large section of this layout to circuses to commemorate the role that railroads played in bringing circuses to the town. They would always have a circus parade, and that was a big event in the towns. And by having the circus parade, people got motivated to buy the tickets and come to the circus. So since I have such a large area of this room devoted to the circus, and we were going to put a town in, why not have the circus parade going through the town? It just made sense.
The layout began operation by using conventional transformers for power. Not long afterward, DCS became available, and like so many others in the hobby, Alan had a decision to make.
We started off with 5 Z4000s, with the remote control, which was conventional. And when Mike brought out the DCS system, like everyone else, I already had a lot of engines that were conventional, not 2.0. So I said, well, we'll see. But as you get into it and you realize this opens up a whole new world of railroad control. It's just phenomenal. So 3 of the 5 Z4000s, which means 6 controls, are now DCS. And that is the bulk of the railroad. The only ones that aren't would be in the circus area, the oil refinery, the coal mining, and the logging operations. But in terms of the large area where you have grades coming up and coming down and you can control the speed and you can run so many trains simultaneously, it is the answer. Everything here has a story, and I can amuse myself and young people and contemporaries by giving them stories of pretty much everything we have here. Well, we have a fireworks factory, and we had a rather lusty general manager of that fireworks factory who decided to have a menage a trois. And in his blissful ignorance, after he satisfied himself, he lit up a cigarette and started a fire in his own factory. Matter of fact, he was killed. He got his just desserts. Meanwhile, you have the 2 women who are being rescued by firefighters, one that's being taken down a ladder from a ladder truck, and another one who's getting ready to jump. There's 4 firefighters below waiting for her to jump from the 3rd story. And I will tell you that they both made it.
On a more sincere note, there's another reason Alan displays fire apparatus on the layout. Look carefully at the figure dressed in yellow.
My wife became one of the first firefighters for Bethlehem Steel in their Burnt Harbor operation. And she later became a firefighter in LaPorte, Indiana. And to commemorate the fact that her independence and breaking some of the ground for women to become firefighters, I've commemorated that with an awful lot of fire engines and firehouses in my wife Kat's honor.
As you can tell, Alan has a lot of fun with his layout. He also enjoys acquiring new skills and rising to new challenges. But a part of the hobby he finds most appealing are the people he meets.
It's a great hobby because it involves so many skills of design, and today with these high-tech trains of running the DCS, of the challenge of learning the system, of being able to control a multitude of trains at one time. There's the scenery aspect. One of the great aspects of this hobby is just meeting other people who are as enthusiastic about this hobby from all walks of life. There's the fun in showing people my age as well as younger people and exposing them to things that they just weren't aware of.
We've enjoyed our visit to this impressive layout. The bridges are spectacular, the scene's beautiful, and those backdrops are absolutely stunning. Looking like a kid in the proverbial candy store, you can tell Alan really enjoys himself. But if you want to see his face really light up with a big smile, you need to know one more thing. He enjoys using the layout as a way of connecting with young people. And when that bridge is crossed, well, we'll let him explain.
Sometimes it's difficult to talk to kids because they live in a different world, a different culture than I was raised in. But here is a connection. Here is someplace that you can find common ground between kids of all ages, and I consider myself a senior kid.